Good morning. It is Thursday, December the 13th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. And I'm speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So what I want to start with is I was listening to Liz Wheeler. There's a network on YouTube. She has a YouTube channel, or actually her network, I guess, does. But she hosts a segment called Tipping Point. And she had a segment on this morning that I wanted to share with you that is about a college professor who claims that mathematics, is racist.
Welcome back. One final point before we go tonight. So, a college professor at the University of Illinois is claiming that mathematics perpetuates white privilege. Yes, apparently math is now racist. The professor's name is Rochelle Gutierrez. Yeah, there she is on the screen. And she just wrote a book. Brilliant marketing strategy, by the way. Say the stupidest thing in the world, get a lot of media coverage for it, probably sell some more books. Now, Professor Gutierrez is a math professor herself. And by math, she obviously doesn't mean actual math. To Professor Gutierrez, math is evidently an acronym for making up theories that are hogwash. This is Professor Gutierrez's theory, which she wrote about in her book. She says, on many levels, mathematics itself operates as whiteness. Who gets credit for doing and developing mathematics? Who is capable in mathematics? And who is seen as part of the mathematical community is generally viewed as white. Wrong. Wrong on so many levels. Who gets credit for doing and developing mathematics? Mathematics operates as whiteness. Okay, first of all, we use Arabic numbers. Arabic numerals, they're called. Not Greek, not European. Arabic numerals, which Professor Gutierrez would know if she stopped virtue signaling for 1 second and cracked open a first-grade arithmetic book. So her argument that the origin of math is white is just plain wrong. Then she says, curricula emphasizing terms like Pythagorean theorem and pi perpetuate a perception that mathematics was largely developed by Greeks and other Europeans. Well, no. The father of algebra is a man named Mohammed ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. If that isn't the whitest name I've ever heard. Al-Khwarizmi made his home in Portland, the whitest city in America. Oh no, wait. Al-Khwarizmi didn't live in Portland. He lived in Baghdad, Iraq. The professor keeps going, though. She claims math makes people feel insecure, which evidently, according to her, is racism against minorities. She says, and I quote here, if one is not viewed as mathematical, there will always be a sense of inferiority that can be summoned. Well, if only people had the freedom to practice math and get better at it. Then she claims minorities have experienced microaggressions from participating in math classrooms where people are judged by whether they can reason abstractly. Then she asks, and this might be my favorite part, are we really that smart just because we do mathematics? Professor, the answer to that is yes, you are significantly smarter if you know how to solve mathematical equations. The reason we learn math in school is not just so we can solve functions for fun. It's to teach our brain how to think logically, something perhaps you should try sometime. Do you really want to ride an elevator to the top of a skyscraper that was built by architects who took trigonometry? Do you want to fly in an airplane whose jet engine was built by engineers who took the calculus of microaggressions in college? It's math. You don't get to be a social justice warrior. You get to teach your students about fractions and functions. You can't make up this kind of idiocy. Unless, of course, you are a tenured professor. Of course, Professor Gutierrez is tenured. Of course she is. This is why tenure is stupid. Professors like her keep their jobs for life, even after they say that math is racist. Professor Gutierrez finally concludes by saying we should change how we study mathematics because, she says, things cannot be known objectively. They must be known subjectively. No, Professor. That's the great thing about math. It's just plain objective. Your opinion doesn't matter. And that's my final point tonight. You can reach me on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler. If you liked the show, please send me an email at oann.com/contact. In the meantime, catch us here tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, have a good night.
So there you have it. And so Liz Wheeler is right and wrong. I mean, she had some interesting things to say, but she approached the whole thing wrong. And this is the trap that conservatives fall into over and over and over again. If there was only one change that conservatives would make, this should be it. And that is quit trying to prove a negative. Okay. Mathematics, up until this professor comes along, mathematics is mathematics. It's objective, it's science, it's for balancing your checkbook, it's for understanding, helping us to understand the world around us. Okay? So then this professor comes along and says, well, no, that's not what it is at all. It's racist. So what she's trying to do is change everybody's opinion, for lack of a better term, about mathematics. Okay, fair enough. But the burden of proof is on the professor. The professor made all kinds of completely arbitrary claims. That it's white in part because of something she calls microaggressions. She doesn't define what a microaggression is, so who knows what that means. That occurs in classrooms. She doesn't say which classrooms or how she knows this is happening in these classrooms. That some people are made to feel superior or inferior. Which people? Are you sure is it white people that are feeling inferior, or are they feeling superior? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every single example that this lady gives is vague and is arbitrary. She provides no proof, no evidence. And again, she's a professor. You would think that if she really thought that there was some kind of a connection here between math, and it would have to be math as it is taught. If you want to say that the people that teach mathematics are racist, then you might have a point if you could prove it. Things cannot be racist. The chair can't be racist. The car can't be racist. So we start with that. I mean, the whole argument is stupid. And that's the bottom line, is to be able to go and say, okay, what evidence does this professor have that mathematics is racist? Nothing. All she does is make a whole series of arbitrary claims, and she ends up looking stupid. Then what Liz Wheeler should have done was say, I demand that this professor resign immediately. And if the professor refuses to resign, I demand that the school fire her immediately. Do whatever it takes to get rid of her. If you can't get rid of her by firing her, then reduce her class sizes, or otherwise make sure that she has no effect. She is completely ineffective. Pay her to show up and do nothing. If she's tenured, and that means that she cannot be fired. But I don't believe that either. I mean, if she commits a crime, if she goes out and commits burglary or robbery, she could be fired, right? So I don't think tenure means you have a lifetime position. But the point is, that's part of one of the things that has to happen. When somebody's making an arbitrary claim, especially a person in a position of responsibility, you have to hold them accountable. And you got to hold them, in this case, accountable by demanding their resignation or demanding that the university that they work for punish them in some way, shape, or form. If you can't fire them, give them a letter of reprimand. Do something. Take away some sort of privilege. Okay, but call for it. And that's what Liz Wheeler should do. Hey, to sum up, that Liz Wheeler says, hey, there's some idiot out there that claims math is racist. But she refuses. It's wrong because she refuses to provide any evidence whatsoever to support her claim. And that's stupid. And stupid people shouldn't be professors. Therefore, this woman should resign immediately and or be fired immediately. And leave it at that. So that's my monologue for this morning. When I come back, I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's from the Ayn Rand lexicon, and then also I'm going to be talking briefly about a book called Defeating Determinism, and reading a little bit from a book about American culture when I come back. Thank you very much. Welcome back. So, again, the Ayn Rand lexicon, all about concepts, not just about words. Words are indeed arbitrary sensible signs with meanings imposed on them by convention. But the concepts that they represent are not arbitrary at all. So, and that's the point, is in the Ayn Rand lexicon, is to get to the essences of words. And it's especially important because one of the tricks that the left likes to play is called identification by non-essentials, or definition by non-essentials, defining words not by what their essence is, their concept, but by other things like the quality, quantity, etc., the color, the size, the shape. And so it's important to be able to know and understand the essence of concepts so that you don't get fooled by the left when they're making their so-called arguments. So the concept of the day for today is decorative arts. The task of the decorative arts is to ornament utilitarian objects such as rugs, textiles, lighting fixtures, etc. This is a valuable task, often performed by talented artists, but it is not an art in the aesthetic philosophical meaning of the term. The psychoepistemological base of the decorative arts is not conceptual, but purely sensory. Their standard of value is appeal to the senses of light and or touch. Their material is colors and shapes in non-representational combinations, conveying no meaning other than visual harmony. The meaning or purpose is concrete and lies in the specific object which they decorate. As a recreation of reality, a work of art has to be representational. Its freedom of stylization is limited by the requirement of intelligibility. If it does not present an intelligible subject, it ceases to be art. On the other hand, a representational element is a detriment in the decorative arts. It is an irrelevant distraction, a clash of intentions, and although designs of little human figures or landscapes or flowers are often used to decorate textiles or wallpaper, they are artistically inferior to the non-representational designs. When recognizable objects are subordinated to and treated as a mere pattern of colors and shapes, they become incongruous. And if they become incongruous, they are no longer decorative. And if they're no longer decorative and they're not art, they're junk. So you got the three categories here. And what she was talking about when she says art is she's referring to fine art, because you make that distinction because the word art comes from the Greek word techne, and that is a term that they used for anything that could be made. So if you got hammer and nails and you created a chair, it was considered that's art. But it's not the same thing as fine art, which is supposed to be, again, as Ayn Rand has described. And again, it's important because that is different than a decorative art. Again, if you have wallpaper is decorative, it's not art. You have, let's say, First Steps by, Van Gogh did a copy of it, did his own version of First Steps. There was a Frenchman, Malou, I think is his name, that apparently did it first, but that's a work of art. And so, as an example, and then you have, I still can't remember the name of the so-called artist. Well, he actually did, I think, did do some art, but Jackson Pollock. Yeah, there you are. So he had some work that was artistic, but he had these other pieces that were done, I believe, in the 60s. And what he did was he took paint and he took different colors and he dripped them onto a canvas and then sold them as art. And I guess he signed them. And if you've ever seen any of his works, you'll realize that they're junk, they're garbage. These works. He has some that could be considered fine art or at the very least decorative, but these pieces with the drips on it are absolute garbage. They're junk. Again, they don't qualify as fine art because there's obviously no metaphysical representation in them, and they cannot be considered decorative because they are, as Ayn Rand said, incongruous. So when I come back, I'm going to be discussing the book Defeating Determinism. Thank you very much. Welcome back. See, I'm trying to find, where is it? There it is, The Illusion of Determinism. That's what it's called. But anyway, so I was reading this book, and at first I thought it was very well done. It was brilliant and whatnot. And then it occurred to me, something about it bothered me. And I was thinking about what it is that bothered me about it. Having some problems here. And I want to read the let's see if we, there we go. There it is, the contents. To give you the idea of the book. You have the acknowledgments, preface, and introduction. Then, we're starting to chapter 1, the brain, what is consciousness, causality, goal-directed action, the self, the Libet studies, much ado about almost nothing, the fatal flaw in determinism, what free will is and is not, and concluding remarks. So what he's trying to do here is basically prove a negative. And this is, again, the trap that most conservatives fall into, is they allow the left to rat trap them into making arguments that they shouldn't be making, wasting time. He wasted a whole lot of time and energy in this book. Determinism is the argument that, or the fiction, that human beings lack free will. Okay, so, and this is an argument that is closely associated with and closely associated with Marxism. Marx was a big determinist, and it works well with, it's a good rationalization for Marxism and for a heavy-handed state. It's also very good any time that you want to justify state action in any particular area in which you want to curb people's freedoms. Smoking is a classic example anywhere in the country, but particularly in Southern California, where the theory is that the only reason that people smoke is because they're forced to, by powers beyond their control, big tobacco. Okay, if it wasn't for big tobacco and their commercials and all their slick advertising and their other various ways of getting into your psyche and forcing you to smoke, people wouldn't do it. Because the left claims that who in their right mind, they ask the question, who in their right mind would use a product that, when used as directed, causes illness and death? Okay, so that's the way they start their argument about determinism. And so then this is where this individual, what's his name here, about the author here, find out, Edwin Locke, that wrote the book about defeating determinism. He then jumps in and starts to try to disprove something that hasn't been proven in the first place. Okay, and one of the things that he does, he talks about axioms, things that are axiomatic or self-evident, and claiming that free will is self-evident. And that being the case, then anybody that wants to argue with free will has the burden of proof. They would have the burden of proving that determinism is valid, but they don't do it. They don't bother to prove it. They don't bother to come up with any evidence. All they do is speculate and make conjectural remarks and arbitrary statements, because all they can do. So it's like the people that want to argue about reality. Very often what they will do, if they're in a situation where, with determinism or with arguing against reality, where it's very risky, because if you come out and say, well, reality doesn't exist, you get laughed off the planet. Nobody's going to listen to you. But if, on the other hand, you say, well, reality, that's interesting. How do we know? Boom. Then everybody takes the bait. They start then going out on their own, trying to figure out, how do we know about reality? And then when they can't work it out in their own mind, they can't work out a proof, then they draw the conclusion on their own that reality must be, if not non-existent, then certainly subjective. And it's simply not true. They just haven't been taught about axioms, about the fact that reality is self-evident. So, and the same thing with this book on determinism. All he's doing when he makes an argument and tries to prove a negative and tries to deal with arbitrary claims such as what the determinists make is he validates the determinists. He validates their arguments. He gives those arguments status. And this is, if there's only one mistake that conservatives should quit making, this is it. And the way you start is by listening. When you're talking to somebody, and if you're not sure, assume they're a lefty, because you're probably going to be right. Because the left has really, really dominated our culture for decades now, since at least the 60s. And listen to what they have to say, and ask yourself if they're making an argument that something is a certain way. And this goes with anybody, left or right. If I make a statement that something is a certain way, and I haven't provided evidence or proof, unless it's something that is axiomatic, and I'm claiming that it's axiomatic, then you've got to consider it an arbitrary claim. Most of the time, if I'm going to make some kind of an arbitrary claim, I'll say, take this with a grain of salt. Because I'll say I don't have evidence to support this, or I don't know the source from where I got a particular piece of information. So I'll tell you, take it with a grain of salt. Rush Limbaugh, on the other hand, says, don't doubt me on this. In other words, trust me. I say, don't trust me. If you're not getting the proof of the evidence from me, and it's something that's important to you, check it out. Go Google it, go to the library, do some research, and do it on your own. But the most important thing is listen to yourself. Listen to that little voice in your head that says, I don't know, something doesn't seem quite right here. Something doesn't really seem quite right. And that's what's going on with this book on defeating determinism. It doesn't need to be defeated because it's self-defeating. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from a book about reclaiming American culture. Thank you very much. So I'll be, let's see. It's called Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding American Culture with Anthony Esolen, and I just have to find my place here. Okay, here we are. So this is part of the introduction of Out of the Ashes, Reclaiming American Culture. We are incompetent in the ordinary things of life. We divorce more readily than we sell houses. Yet, for some reason, we believe that we possess great wisdom as regards men and women that our benighted ancestors did not possess. Excuse me. We raise sons who are not weaned at age 25. Yet, for some reason, we have contempt for the old institutions that used to turn boys into men. We raise daughters who emulate well-paid whores, but who do not actually make the money that the whores made, and yet we persist in believing that only in our time has a girl had half a chance to live a decent life. We are in debt over the eyeballs. We cannot make ends meet even on 2 incomes, and yet we hug ourselves for being liberated. Looking with pity on a grandmother who, in a single day, did 50 skillful things for people she loved, rather than spending 8 hours fielding phone calls in an office, or scraping plaque off the teeth of strangers while wearing goggles and a face mask to guard against dreadful infections from their blood and spittle. Every single pagan philosopher of the ancient world said that if you wanted to be free, you had to learn the hard ways of virtue, and that the worst form of slavery was slavery to your own appetites. That is what the founders of the United States also believed. That is what Christian preachers used to preach. That is what we have repudiated or forgotten, so that now we look to a massive central government for everything. It tells you what proportion of male and female athletes you have to have in your schools. It tells you what you have to buy. It tells you have to buy a certain form of medical insurance. It tells you that you have to bake a cake to help sodomites celebrate their mock marriage. It now bids fair to tell you what toilet you have to let a transvestite use, or transvestite inside a man wearing men's clothing on the outside but a frilly skirt on the inside in his quote-unquote identity, a wrath conjured up by his own imagination. It tells you what you may say and what you may not say on pain of being prosecuted for hate, not for an act, but for an attitude. If your uncle gives you a magnificent Rolls Royce and a year later he wants to see how you have done with it, and you show him a tangled mess of metal and rubber caused not by a freak accident but by your habitual misuse, he will naturally conclude that you're incompetent to own a Rolls Royce. We were given a republic that guaranteed a wide berth for liberty and for local oversight of local matters, with the central government reserved only for matters that were truly national. We now have what every single one of our founders, Federalists and Anti-Federalists both, would have considered tyrannical. It's a tangled mess. So we need to clear out the garbage, admit our errors, and rebuild. That requires humility, patience, and determination. But nothing else will do. When your only choices are repentance or oblivion, you repent. It is time to get to work, and that's what this book is all about. So I will pick up next time with Chapter 1, Giving Things Their Proper Names, the Restoration of Truth-Telling. I think this is going to be an excellent book because it gets to the heart of the matter that in order to change our politics, the left first has to change our culture. And they've been very, very successful in doing just that. That's why we have the things that he has described, where you have now boys able to go into the girls' room and girls being able to go into the boys' room and that kind of thing. Those kinds of issues going on. It starts with cultural ways of bamboozling you in terms of the culture, in terms of your use of words, using anti-concepts to obliterate legitimate concepts. For instance, using the word migrant instead of immigrant or emigrant. An emigrant is the one that leaves. Immigrant is the one that comes in. That's what human beings do. They emigrate and they immigrate. And animals migrate. But I see it on the news all the time. Migrants are at the border. No, immigrants or potential immigrants are at the border. Not migrants. They're not animals. It's not a herd of buffalo. Okay? Animals migrate. And the difference is property. Human beings own property and have an expectation of privacy and therefore property rights. Animals do not. That's why they migrate. They don't know diddly squat about property. Okay? And the United States is basically property. It's the property of the citizens and to a certain extent, I guess, the residents, the legal residents of the United States of America, but particularly the citizens of the United States. It's property. And so what the idea is, if they can get you to think in terms of migration, people just wandering around, that you will forget that there is supposed to be a border. You will forget the idea of property that's associated with immigration and emigration. Please don't forget it. Please, whenever, this is one of the ways where if you want to make a difference, you want to know, what can I do? This is an excellent thing you can do. Anybody that talks to you, any of your friends, and whether they're socialist, right, left, center, because there's a lot of conservatives, I hear them on the radio talking about migrants, and I want to scream at them, and sometimes I scream at the radio. There's no such thing. And you got to tell your friends, your relatives, those people around you that come to you and want to talk about migrants, you got to correct them. Or at least, at the very least, see, I don't know what you're talking about. What's a migrant? Okay, but you got to stop that dead in its tracks. Okay, because that's the way they eventually get you to change the way you think and view the world. And if you start viewing the world from a socialist perspective, what do you think you're going to do when you go into the voting booth? So, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And I thank you for listening, and until next time, have a great day.